Something that I have to look a little further into and do some research is the wrist pin, the way they install in the new JE pistons. Now, previously, any of the pistons that I've assembled in the past, the wrist pin has come up to the edge of the piston where it snaps into position and is centered perfectly. So for example, this is a factory piston. This is the factory wrist pin right here. If I slide it in position, now you would see right here this wrist pin, and I'm going to just slide it back and forth a little bit so you can see the movement. The wrist pin comes up to the edge where the C-clip, and some people call it circlip, but either way the C-clip would snap into position right here on both sides. Therefore, to keep the wrist pin centered from walking back and forth. On these, I had to press the pins in slightly. It wasn't very hard to press in, but my thing is they're going to shift and move around in here. And as you can see with these pistons right here, I have probably looked like somewhere of a 3/8 inch gap on each side where the wrist pin still has room to walk back and forth inside the piston housing. Now, the bottom of the new piston, it does have a wider base. So for example, factory piston somewhere around here. And we're looking at around 20, and it's just rough guesstimate, somewhere around 23 millimeter. And of course, if you go to these, you have like 23.6. So it's slightly wider right here, but then overall, we're looking at around, just say 69, around 70 millimeters. And if I go over here, the width of this is 74. So it's a lot wider, but my problem would be if that wrist pin starts to slide back and forth and slides all the way to one side. I've literally tapped it all the way over as far as it would go to the snap ring, and it actually went as far as the inner oil groove right there. So when I tapped it all the way over, it left pretty much, it looked like almost a ½ inch of room right there. Now granted, and looking from the piston on the inside right here, it walked all the way over to somewhere around here. And I can see this groove right here once I tap the wrist pin all the way over. So it would leave that much surface area as far as piston force. I'm not too pleased with that. So I'm going to give a call to see if there was some type of mistake made or what, because we've been stumbling across several errors that manufacturers and different people have been making mistakes. Now, something else possibly in their defense, but either way, when you make the piston up, you should make sure the wrist pin fits the piston properly, because this was sold as a kit. The factory wrist pin is the same length as the aftermarket one. So did they have different shops machining this and putting it together? Because I did hear they had some downtime, and was some of the work subbed out? I'm not sure. But either way, this wrist pin, in my eyes, should potentially be longer enough to come all the way across and fill up this gap, as I stated before, on each one of the pistons, so that way you can create or keep the wrist pin centered from walking back and forth. Now I took a measurement on the inside of the piston. It appears that the wrist pin would have to be somewhere around 60 millimeter to give it a nice fit, almost from end to end, and possibly allow it to slide just a little bit back and forth without buttoning up really tight against the circlip. 60, possibly 60.5, something like that. 61 would possibly be a little too tight for it to shimmy back and forth. But somewhere around that area, it appears that the wrist pin with these pistons, it should have been somewhere around that. This is actually the second video I'm filming of the wrist pin. Wanted to give you a better look at what happened with the wrist pin if I tap it over. So if I tap the wrist pin slightly all the way over to the C-clip, you can see it's flush up against the C-clip here. But over in this side, you can actually see it's probably an easy ½ inch distance before it gets to the C-clip. You can literally see the internal port for lubricating the wrist pin itself. So with that being said, this wrist pin is not, if it's shifted over and under high boost, would not really be distributing an even amount of force to the piston down through the rod. One side will be getting the full amount of wrist pin surface area, and over here you're grabbing just a little lip right here, which is not good. And as I said earlier, this is the factory wrist pin right here, and the one that I was supplied with the pistons. I was appearing to be very short with the new pistons that I received for this 3.6 liter engine build. Originally, in the other video, I showed the wrist pins, and this is with the wrist pin kind of tapped in the center. You can see the distance between each side. But over here, if you look at this one, I tapped it all the way up against this circlip or snap ring. And here you can see it's like almost ½ inch away from the snap ring over here. You can literally see the internal port for lubricating the wrist pin is shifted over that far. So these are definitely a lot shorter than what need be. But the wrist pins were actually the same dimensions of the factory one. So I'm not sure if someone measured incorrectly. This is the one I received with the piston. They all come in at 52 millimeter. And the factory one, so you can see this is the factory one. This is the one I received. It's a lot heavier duty wrist pin, as well as the factory wrist pin also comes in at 52. Let me get a better grip. Around 51.8, 52 millimeters. And here we go again. So these are definitely a lot shorter than what need be. If you look at the piston right here, you can see how this comes up shorter than where I had to send it. But if I pull it all the way over close to somewhere where the wrist pin would be, look at that little bit of edge that's grabbing. That is not good at all. This is my second video of the pistons and my wrist pin dilemma. So I actually tapped the wrist pin all the way over against the snap ring, and you can see it's up tight against it. Over here in the piston, it appears I'm somewhere close to about ½ inch away. You can literally see the oil port for lubrication for the wrist pin. It can actually slide over that far. So that is definitely not good. It's coming up extremely short. And just for another example, this is the factory wrist pin right here. And the ones that I received, factory wrist pin measures in at 51.9, 51.8 millimeter. The ones I received, 52 on the dot. So just for another reference, this is, and you can see all of them have the same job number or serial number. If this wrist pin was just a general reference, if I was to slide this over to where the snap ring would be somewhat located in the position, you can see how far this would be off, and that is not good at all. I literally, like I said, I tapped them in the center just to kind of somewhat center them for photo reasons, but under high horsepower and just normal engine operation, this wrist pin would be walking back and forth. And then under high boost applications, that is definitely not good at all. That even take away from proper oil lubrication of the wrist pin itself if is totally being missed by the oil port. Back in the edge assembly room, a few items came in. It's delivered today. Piston ring installer. Add that into addition with my typical standard piston ring installer. So I'll get a chance to try this one. Allegedly it's a little more professional, but either way, as long as you don't expand the rings too much. And as well as Teddy's bushings for his front control arms. So these will go in the front. I've already installed all the ones on his rear subframe, and that was definitely a little workout. And now I'm about to pick up with continuing to grind each one of the piston rings for the cylinder with this contraption here. So it's time consuming. Every day I get off of work, I'll go and do a little bit at a time and fill this board up until everything's complete. I have cylinder number 2, second piston ring, getting kind of close. You can see it's like a slight little gap in between there, very slight. Now I'm to the point where I just need to file it a little bit to 25,000. This is a quick video of how much material they had to actually take off the rods. So these bad boys must have really been out of balance. Now that I look a little closer, look at how flat and how much they had to take off. This one is flat, and of course this is round. So they had to shave a lot of material off to really get these rods balanced. So it is very good that we took them to the machine shop, and this is just 1 and 3. And then, for example, the head of this one, you can still see the casting on number 3 where they didn't have to take hardly any material off at all. But 1, they really had to, you know, get down pretty good at sanding a lot of material off. You can see the rough casting, and then we're sanded smooth and back into the rough casting again. So it's good that they balanced these rods very well. I am waiting to hear back from our supplier, and I think they sent this to engineering again ASAP, and they made another big boo-boo. So it appears they may have already shipped out the remaining 3 pistons that we need for our engine, or 3 for Teddy and 3 for mine, total 6 pistons. So we have here cylinder 2, 4, and 6. I'm waiting on 1, 3, and 5. I came across a big error that I'm not happy with, and that's with the wrist pin. And as you can see, it's shoved all the way across that way up against the circlip right there. So this wrist pin is too short for the piston. And with the shipping invoice, they gave the dimensions of the new revised pistons, and they're shipped with the same exact diameter pin. I almost want to say, who in the hell is checking their equipment before shipment? I should not have to go through this, and I should not have to continue to research behind other professionals and find discrepancies and mistakes. If I was just totally green and didn't have any experience, I would have just assembled these, put these in the block, and we would have had block failure and not have known what the root cause was. We would have thought that maybe it was putting out too much horsepower, and all of a sudden it sheared the piston or rod off, and not knowing that the wrist pin would have been shifting over too far and not distributing the full load on these supports right here, and would have caused piston failure with a high performance piston. So that is not good. But anyway, I'm waiting to hear some feedback, and now not only did they have to correct the pistons, they have to correct the wrist pins. So I'm gonna have to disassemble all of these again, pop the pins out, and ship these pins back so that they can ship me the correct pins. And I'm not thrilled with that at all. But waiting to hear some confirmation that that is what happened. But I'm pretty certain they made another major mistake. Alright, I have the box open, and he is just too curious. Buddy, I think I'm a lot more curious than you. Alright, let's go into the assembly room and double check for confirmation. This should be opposite of this baby. Okay. New number. Alright, starting to look a little something. Let's see. And I think they have it correct. Perfect. I think we might be correct. The only downfall. It appears it has a deeper bowl, but this is coated. The other one's uncoated because I'm about to send these out to another performance shop and have them coat the pistons, the side skirts, as well as the tops. But I almost want to scream. I hope they kept my compression the same, but it appears that something has changed. Okay, I feel better. I just needed to confirm. I had to get an original factory piston just to confirm what was happening. I paused for a second because you can see the valve reliefs on this side, how deep they are. And I'm like, okay, what the heck? But everything is matching up properly. So for example, this piston would be for cylinder 2, 4, and 6. And this will be the original piston for 2, 4, and 6. Okay, you can see the comparison, except these are slightly lower compression. It's got the deeper valve release on this side right here, and the smaller ones here, just as this piston right here. All right, over here, this would match up for cylinders 1, 3, and 5. You can see the difference, except I wanted deeper valve release also, so you can see the small little eyebrows or indentations right here for the valve release on the exhaust side, just in case. No, just in case. When I go with a more aggressive camshaft, also on the exhaust, if I needed to have larger cam for reducing back pressure or anything like that. But anyway, look like we're in business. Everything matches up great. So these were the original set that we received. These are for banks or cylinders 2, 4, and 6. And you can see right here the original factory piston. These are lower compression. The valve release here, you can see that they're a little bit deeper. I wanted bigger valve release for running larger or more aggressive camshafts, as well as here, this is for cylinders 1, 3, and 5. And as you can see, this is cylinder 3 for an example. The valve release right here on the front, and on the exhaust side, you can see the small little indentation, or some people call them eyebrows, right here. These are cut out a little bit deeper for if we wanted to run a more aggressive exhaust cam. So it appears we may be back on track. The last thing we're waiting on is heavy duty wrist pins. And I'll send these out, have these coated, the side skirts as well as a thermal barrier coating on the top, and continue to move forward. It's also good that I was on point with doing an inspection of these. So for example, I stuck the wrist pin in. Just is the last thing that we're waiting on is the correct wrist pins. So these pistons were coated, and when I stuck the wrist pin in here, the wrist pin would barely move back and forth because of the coating that's been added on here. Here, fresh piston, uncoated, and I was describing if I was to go with this incorrect wrist pin, it will walk back and forth. And just a little example of that is, you can hear me shaking the wrist pin back and forth. So it's just sliding in and out just like this. So you do not want that at all. Correct wrist pin should be here, and hopefully less than a week. I'll have to package all of these up and send them back these wrist pins are too short, and will receive the correct wrist pins once they receive these.